What is up, conscious monkeys? Welcome back to another episode of Traveling to Consciousness. As always, you guessed it, I'm your host, Clayton. And in this week's podcast, we are talking to the one, the only Rachel Fiori. Rachel is a very fascinating cat. She's been all over the spiritual podcast landscape. And quite frankly, she's pretty wise. Her history is also very interesting. She graduated with a master's of science in occupational therapy. She has a BA in business and corporate communications, and as you'll be able to tell throughout our podcast, she is very delicate and concise with her words, which is beautiful. She has psychic abilities of spiritual healing, vibrational medicine. She's often called like a spiritual surgeon and has been helping people for the last 25 years, which is so fascinating and amazing to me, where I'm able to sit down with these people who have been in the spiritual landscape for 18, 25 years. And, I kind of consider myself to be around the 2 to 3 year-ish mark of like really diving into this stuff. So I do consider myself extremely grateful and fortunate to be around people with so much experience. It's mind blowing. And honestly, you'll see at the end, if you stick to the end, the very last question I ask her, I'm not going to spoil it, but she hits home. I ask her a question about myself and if she can tap in, and she absolutely knocks it out of the park. But until we get there, you're going to hear her bringing up things talking about the universal ways of oneness. And she goes deeper in her book, Mason's Way, the 20 Universal Ways of Oneness, taught by the spirit of an enlightened dog, which is an interesting title. Very interesting. So to figure out a little bit more about that, you're going to need to listen to the podcast as well. She talks a lot about how we can activate our oneness consciousness within humans. And I really think that she's onto something here. This whole act of becoming one with the creator, with spirit, with source, with God. That's our purpose here. The rishis of India always talk about that. So it is my hope, if you will, that you can utilize some of this information to embody that oneness, or at least make the next step in your path to that oneness. As you guys all know, this is only part number 1 of the podcast, and we will have a couple more parts releasing either on Monday, Thursday, or Saturday. I have started introducing Saturday as like a new day for podcasts. I don't know why. I just want to put more stuff out there. And so this is kind of like an optional day. So whenever I post stuff on Saturday, see it as like a little bonus, because it's not going to be every day, every Saturday. Obviously, it's not going to be every day, but it's not going to be every Saturday, as sometimes I want to put them out. Sometimes I don't have the time to do it. So it's really going to be a give and take with my energy. If I can get to a time where it's always there, that'd be dope. But I am talking a lot more about me, and instead I want to introduce you guys to Rachel Fiori.
Traveling to consciousness, exploring spiritual journeys to find answers in uncertainty.
Yeah, I like it here. It's cool. I've been working like at the gym recently, and so it's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, life's
very down to earth.
Pittsburgh is?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like,
or at least
like
it used to be.
Yeah, it's like that. I mean, I think it's still there a lot more. At least that's the people I hang out with. So I feel like that could probably be a thing where no matter what city you're in, you could find people who are completely opposite of you and people who are completely the same, based on how open you are to finding those people in every city.
Absolutely. Yep. How long have you been there?
2 years now, 2.5-ish years.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. Whenever I quit my job in San Diego, I was going to, what was I going to do? I was going to do something. Oh, I was going to live in Brazil for like probably a year, but then they changed up their restrictions. So I only got like 2 months out of it.
Gotcha.
And on top of that, if I'm being brutally honest, it can be very difficult to go to a country that's not speaking your first language and try to make friends and try to feel comfortable.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Have you ever
Yeah.
been out of the country like that before?
Not for that amount of time. Only probably the longest 2 weeks, maybe at a
Mm.
time. And um, being in Spain, so I visited Spain a couple different times. But I was with my older sister, and she's fluent. She teaches high level linguistics. So when you have somebody that speaks the language and can translate everything, it's a very different experience.
Yeah, you got like the VIP treatment.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Have you ever tried learning Spanish, or was that something that just hasn't come up yet?
I did when I was younger. I could muddle my way through fairly well when I was young, but I lost it.
Isn't that so I find language so fascinating, especially like, and this is probably something people don't talk about in like the spirituality consciousness community, because we're all about perspectives and different
Yeah,
dimensions. Learning a different language is shifting yourself into a different dimension.
it is completely. It completely is. Learning, when you learn something like that, and I actually think there's a reason why um, it isn't just naturally a part of the American culture. I think that's done on purpose. It's not like you don't have language in school, but it's to a degree that's just, it's not valued. It isn't required to a degree where you have to actually learn another language. Learning how to say hello and where's the bathroom in three different languages isn't learning language, and that's just not something that we do in the United States, which I think is purposeful. Um, but I think that, yeah, I mean, you want to raise your level of consciousness and expand a little bit, become bilingual at least, learn another language. I mean, I think it's absolutely critical.
What is it that you think, or why do you think that it's purposeful that United States education system doesn't put a second language as a, why do we not highly value, maybe that's a better way to phrase it, why don't we highly value learning a second language as American citizens?
I think because I think number one, I think in our country, they want to keep us as dumbed down as possible because we're more easily brainwashed and controlled that way. And when you cannot fluently speak other languages, how difficult is it for you to actually travel other than vacation? You know, how difficult is it for you to go around the world and explore and become integral parts of other places in the world in unity with them, embracing them, honoring them? It's a lot harder to be highly conscious when you only are in one tiny little bubble and you're not educated enough to expand that bubble.
Hmm. Do you think there's any, I'm curious here because I've not consciously thought about this before, but I know a part of the programming is America's number one, we're the best. If you come here, you got to conform to our way of living.
Yep.
Do how much of that do you think plays a role compared to, this being purposefully done?
Oh, I think that's part of it as well. I think the arrogance that we have, that we've developed over the decades, is definitely there. And I do think that is part of it. And I don't think there is anything wrong with going to any country. I think in the way of honoring, when you go to any country and you actually live there, you should speak the language of that country, hands down. It isn't a racist thing to say that when people come to this country, they should learn to speak English. Of course they should if they're living here. It doesn't mean they should never speak their own language. That's where we get into trouble and we're dishonoring people. The other languages are absolutely beautiful. They should be welcomed. They should be honored. But if you're living in this country, should you speak the language of this country? Of course. But that goes the same with every other country. It's the honoring of the language and the culture of that country. If I move to Italy next week, I don't speak Italian. I better start learning.
Mm.
And you would hope that when I move to Italy next week, that the people in that country in the way of honoring would embrace me. They would help me when I'm muddling through the language and I don't speak it very well until I learn the language well enough on my own independently. That is the way of honoring and embracing people that come to your country that were not originally from there. That's all part of oneness consciousness. That's the way that we should be elevated enough to do that. That if you're not speaking, English very well, I should be willing to help you get what you need because obviously this is challenging. This is a struggle for you. the 20 universal ways of oneness, which is what I teach about as a mystical teacher. And one of them is the way of compassion. That's the way of compassion. Another is the way of honoring. That's the way of honoring another human. It's not you're speaking a different language here, so get the fuck out. Like, what is wrong with us? Or I'm not going to help you because you're not speaking English. That's a disgusting way to live. And you're functioning in a very low grade of consciousness if that's what we're doing to people. It doesn't mean people who come into another country, whatever country in the world we're talking about, in the way of honor, if you're going to live in that country, learn the language of that country. That never means throw your language in the trash. And that's the difference. That's a more elevated way that we can live in oneness with one another. Our differences are beautiful. We should honor them.
Yeah, I noticed this. At least it really hit me in the face. Like I really became consciously aware of this when I was living in San Diego. I trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and so it exposed me to the whole community, not the whole community, but a large portion of the Brazilian community. And it was very interesting, the dynamics that were at play in regards to speaking the language and helping other people. Because a lot of the feedback that I was getting from Brazilians was, it's so cool how you're patient with us speaking. It's so cool how you're trying to also learn the language. Majority of Americans, based on their feedback, is that if you're not at least somewhat able to communicate in English, that it's just, they're dismissive.
Yes.
And I noticed whenever I went to Brazil, how people loved that I was trying to learn Portuguese.
Yeah.
They were like, who's this white American kid coming to our country and trying, like, he's trying to learn it. Like, yeah, I'll help you. Yeah. Like, what do you like? How can I get you this? Like, in the patience and the calmness in their spirit to just be that aid that I needed at that time.
Beautiful. The way of patience is another way, universal way of oneness. I mean, it's such a divine quality and characteristic that we should become ourselves in order to offer that to ourselves in our everyday lives. And also, if we can offer that and become that for ourselves, it's easy to offer that to other people. And, that's when we talk about elevating and becoming more highly conscious and, the teachings that I offer in what I do, it's a becoming. You literally cannot offer other people what you haven't yet become yourself. And that's part of what is so lacking in a lot of humans. And unfortunately, it is an extreme lack in the United States of America because we've become so arrogant thinking that it means something to be number one. Number one in what? Other than arrogance and pride? Like, what are we number one in? And why are we trapped in a low grade of consciousness that is pride? That's a negative vibrational frequency. We want to be trapped in pride.
Well, I'd say we're definitely number one in like free speech, at least for the most part. At the time of us having this conversation, we're number one in that. Definitely seems like there's powers at play that are trying to degrade that quickly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But so I guess there are regards, I think, where we are number one, but there does seem a sense that I mean, like, it's weird because I think the majority of people listening to this podcast are going to tend to be on the side of compassionate, of loving, but there are a large pocket, I think, of Americans that do sit in that realm of, okay, I'm not going to give you the time of day if you're not able to even communicate at the base level. And I feel like this is also probably deeply tied to the value or the amount of, like, putting too much value in our time. And I want to say this carefully because I know time is very valuable. But even if you kind of go to like a New York or maybe San Francisco is probably a little bit better, but I've noticed like in New York, it's like people are always trying to get somewhere. I'm always seeing people getting triggered by the fact that someone cut them off or, this little thing happened. And so it's a very fascinating thing that we're not able to just kind of take a step back and just take our hands off the wheel and just kind of like relax into the present moment.
The way of presence is one of the 20 universal ways of oneness. The way of presence.
So you keep bringing up this universal way of oneness, and Also, I should also note for the audience that you have been highly recommended by Ellie Lee, who was on episode Odyssey number, I think 83. I want to get that right. But even as I was researching you and looking at other podcasts that you had done, many of these other podcast hosts also were putting you in very high regards for your work that you're doing. Ellie Lee was 82 for those interested. But everyone who I've seen talk about you, it's put you in very high regards. Why do you think that is? What are you doing that's so special?
I wouldn't call it special. I would say that I actually walk my talk. I'm not just out here wearing a mask of mysticism and spirituality and posting cute memes. I practice what I preach. I live what I talk about. I live what I teach others as a spiritual teacher. I've become everything that I share with others. And so I can speak from a very elevated place. And I have zero tolerance for bullshit. I just have zero tolerance for the pseudo spirituality that has become such a part of our collective consciousness. For people who are spiritual, there's been a wave, especially over the last decade, of, woke culture. And I'm spiritual because I do plant medicine. I'm spiritual because this makes me spiritual. And they've lost the meaning of what spirituality actually is. And so I think when people work with me, the clients that I work with from all over the world, they see what this work is that I actually offer. They see the level of elevation because they experience it. It isn't just something that I talk about or promote to make money. I live this work. I live it. I've become it. And I share it in a way that comes from the way of truth and the way of integrity and the way of loyalty, all the ways of oneness that I teach about. And I think when people experience that and they feel that, they can feel a very different type of energy, even when I'm, shattering somebody's ego and their programming and their mental programming they might not be aware of, because I come through energetically and punch people in the face a lot with the stuff that I teach. But I don't do that from a place of judgment ever. It doesn't exist here. I don't do it from a place of superiority. That lacks the way of equality. That's one of the ways of oneness. It's just from the way of truth. And this is what we need to see and deal with and face head on in order to alchemize it, elevate out of that, and get to a higher level of consciousness, which means a higher level of unconditional love, one of the ways of oneness, a higher level of peace. So I think the value of the work that I offer, I became an expert in my field. And like I said, I actually apply it. I live it. I am it. So it's not a mask. It isn't a facade. And it's what I believe in most passionately, can so easily and profoundly change humanity in this world. So it's why I'm also very passionate about it. And I think people can tell the level of passion that I have for the work that I offer.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed in people's voices when they're talking about something. You can usually tell if they're aligned with what they're doing or if they're engaged with what they're doing.
Yeah.
And it resonates with me that you're looking for that truth and that a true essence of what spirituality is. In that answer, you mentioned pseudo spirituality.
Yeah.
What is that? How does that manifest? What are we talking about here when we say pseudo spirituality?
Yeah. I think what's been created over the years is a spiritual matrix. And it's, a lot of people talk about separating from the matrix. Well, in a couple minutes, maybe we'll talk about what the universal matrix or the mystical matrix actually is. I think there's a lot of confusion, or maybe just lack of education in what that actually is. But you can't not live in a matrix. We are nothing but energy, or we are nothing but consciousness, whether we are in our human form aware of that or not. We don't realize how powerful we are. I think we deny our divinity often in the way that we live our human lives. We don't realize that we are powerful co-creators 100% of the time. You can't not be a powerful divine co-creator. You can't not be that. You are that, whether you realize it or not. And so everybody is creating together in oneness, even though we don't yet know what oneness really means. We are always creating in oneness. So when we talk about, I refer to as the third dimensional matrix, what most people say, the matrix, get out of the matrix, you're being brainwashed, all of that stuff. I call it the third dimensional matrix. And the reason why I refer to it in that way is because that matrix that we all function in, that helps us create and collectively live as divine humans together in oneness, even though it comes from separation consciousness. The spiritual matrix, these matrices are created by us energetically, collectively, period, end. When we come from separation consciousness, all we created was the third dimensional matrix, which functions from separation consciousness, duality, hate, racism, misogyny, superior, inferior, inequality, et cetera, et cetera. All the things that we see coming to the surface all over the world. We've created that. That's why it's here. It isn't them versus us. It's we've all created this, and we've all created it energetically. Every moment of every day, we contribute to that being an ongoing way that we live, whether we realize it or not. And most people, of course, we don't realize how we continue to contribute to that and put energy into that, staying alive and perpetuating it versus creating a different type of matrix. You can't not live in energy. We are energy. It's just what type of energy are we creating together as a collective? And so to get back to the pseudo-spiritualism, we've really created over the years a spiritual matrix that's a third dimensional matrix created from actually separation consciousness. We've created this collective spiritual community, so to speak, where people are woke and I'm awakened and you're not. That's the same shit that happened. What people are saying, they're breaking away from the matrix. No, you're not. It just looks different. People do plant medicine 17 times in a month and they think that means they're awakened beings. They're haphazardly, recklessly, and in ignorance using what plant medicine is actually here for, versus elevating and becoming the way of honoring and valuing a level of mystical spiritual education that is absolutely critical and necessary. If you don't have deep levels of true spiritual education while you are on a path of awakening or while you are calling yourself a spiritual person, you're not. You're a pseudo spiritual person. True spiritual people, which I've kind of separated from spirituality for the most part, and I focus on the path of the mystic, of mysticism. But if you really are a quote unquote spiritual person, it isn't just about what we think society says is spiritual or what's cool or what's trendy. That's ignorance. That's immaturity. That's not what it means to be an awakening being. An awakening being is, I am in the process of becoming. I am becoming. I am becoming divine. And not because it sounds awesome and it makes me look like a good person and I get validation from the world. I am becoming divine in my challenges that the universe gives to me in order for me to grow. I am the way of surrender. There's a becoming, and it is not an easy path. It is a path of a warrior, right? So pseudo-spiritualism is just, I dress in the robes, I wear the beads, I meditate with crystals, I do all the things, and I tell everybody about it, and I dance around a fire half naked, and I put my intentions out, and it's fake. It's surface level. No criticism here, by the way. There's nothing wrong with playing with that stuff and doing whatever you want to do on this planet. It's your life. So it's not a judgment. There's no inferiority, nothing like that. It's just we've misunderstood and we perpetuate what spirituality is not. And people are still trapped in that third dimensional matrix. It's just a spiritual one now.
What's resonating with me is it feels like this comes down to the intention that you're bringing in with regards to spirituality.
Yes, I think that is part of it. And it's an acute level of self-awareness.
To be spiritual is an acute awareness.
A true awakening person, if you are authentically awakening and on this path, what does it mean to be an awakened being? All that means is I have an acute level of self-awareness. Every mental program I run, every wound I have ever had and maybe still have, what's left of it, when it gets triggered, how it gets activated in me, what emotional programs start running, what mental programs start running. And I have the power and I take first way of oneness, universal ways of oneness is the way of responsibility. I am the way of responsibility, which means I stop at nothing to become acutely aware of every aspect of me that is not yet divine. And when that gets triggered and activated, and that starts to show up with my behavioral programs, I stop and I choose divinity over my shadow self in that way. It is an acute level of self-awareness that we need to gain. If you are gaining an acute level of self-awareness, instead of, I'm angry, I'm hateful, I'm pointing my finger at you because of what you did, you are completely unconscious in that moment. That's not a spiritually awakening person or awakened person. It's, oh, let me see what my actual feelings are, what my emotional programs are, what my mental programs are saying about this scenario. And let me alchemize all of that and elevate into a more divine being right now so I can handle this situation from my mystical, powerful divine self, not from my shadow self, my mental programs that say you're just wrong because you might be acting like a jerk, by the way. But how I show up in that moment says everything about me and not very much about you. So it starts with a level of I'm willing to gain an acute level of divine self-awareness where I don't hide, I don't justify, I don't make excuses for, I don't fall into victim consciousness. I just say, oh, here's how I feel. These are my emotions right now. These are my mental programs, and I'm willing to take responsibility for them, not blame, not go into victimhood, not project. That in this moment right here, right now, every moment is a moment to expand and become a little bit more enlightened.
I really like that idea of acute self-awareness. And what it's bringing up in me is how in my past, I've been super unaware of where I was coming up short, where there was lacking divinity, where I was running on mental programs. I know
Yeah.
whenever I've probably said this before on the podcast, but back whenever I was in college, I very much loved the conspiracy theory rabbit hole. And I know that back then I was like, I'm awake. I fucking
Yeah.
get it. Nobody else really knows, but I do.
Right.
And it's amazing looking back thinking like, wow, how did I think I was awake back then whenever it's like all this new shit that's coming up. So in regards to acute self-awareness,
Mm.
how do we develop a stronger ability for us to become acutely self-aware?
Yeah. Great question. And I just want to piggyback. I think one of the things you said was absolutely magnificent is that, you know, with what we say conspiracy theory and a lot of stuff that really is true, you know, a lot of it really is, it's not conspiracy. It's not theory. It's happening.
I have a thing that I think the term conspiracy theory is a whole conspiracy theory in and of itself.
I love that. I love that. I love it. But what you said something so magnificent, and it was because I was becoming aware of these things, that meant I was woke. And that's where people are trapped in pseudo spiritualism. Because what that means is that makes me, I'm aware of that out there. So I over here am awakened, and they are not one and the same. That's still separation consciousness. An awakening person says, whoa, holy crap, I'm becoming aware of all of this crazy stuff out there. Whoa, okay. What is that doing to me? What effect does that have on me from the inside out? Number one. Number two, which is the most critical. How have I been creating and contributing to that? Because we are one, whether we understand what that means yet or not. How have I been contributing to the horrors and the crazy that I see in the world? An unawakened person, whether they're spiritual or not, says, they out there, I'm over here awakened, except that you're not, because you're still perpetuating inequality instead of the way of equality. You are perpetuating separation consciousness instead of oneness consciousness. Oneness consciousness means I see that out there. That is scary. I don't want that to be a part of this world or humanity or the planet. It is horrifying. It is horrific. And it is. It is barbaric. It's all the things. What have I done in my unconsciousness to help keep that alive or perpetuate it? Because that is where, if I am authentically awakening, that is where I need to start. I work on me, I elevate me, I heal every aspect of me that is my shadow aspects, my shadow self, where I am anything less than divine. That is my job as an awakening person, to see it, to own it, never to justify it, never to make excuses for. There are reasons for it. Reasons are not the same as excuses. You experience true trauma. You have massive wounds. There are reasons. Of course, you have been through it. Yes, those were real things that you went through. Let's heal. Let's elevate, expand out of it, and not perpetuate all of the programs that created your shadow self that got created from those experiences. That is where we start. And that's why true awakening is an acute level of self-awareness. If you don't have that, of every program, every wound, every unhealed aspect of you, you don't have that yet, you are not an awakening being. That's not a judgment. It's just the way of truth.
Yeah, a story of mine that's coming up. When would this have been? This would have been right whenever the war in Ukraine had started. I did a breathwork session, one of my first ones, where you kind of like hyperventilate and then massive DMT release. And I had this like just epiphany that, and let me actually backtrack before I give you that. Throughout like most of my life, through high school and then into college, I kind of always had like a weight problem where I just loved food. Like food was just so amazing. Oh my gosh. Like I could just devour so much food, eat so much that it hurt. It physically hurt because of how amazing I loved food. And so I dove all the way down the food nutrition rabbit hole, tried If It Fits Your Macros, tried paleo, tried carnivore, tried keto, tried every single diet under the sun. So flash forward, I'm doing this breathwork session, massive DMT releases. My hands are kind of like make this claw grip.
Yeah.
That tensing. That kind of freaked me out a bit. Like it was just wild. And what happened was this epiphany came to me that I had a scarcity mentality related to food.
Beautiful.
And I sat up real quick and I was like, no, that can't be right. That can't be right. At the time, I was eating 6 eggs and 6 strips of bacon for like each meal, which is crazy. And so I did this like meditative practice where I kind of sat there and envisioned a bowl of eggs that was half filled. And I noticed how much anxiety that filled me with.
Wow. Beautiful.
I was like, this is crazy. I was like, that shocked me. Where I wanted to tie this in then to what you were saying is like, how does this affect the bigger picture? And so at the time, this was the same time that war in Ukraine was starting up.
Wow.
And it hit me. It was like, okay, the reason, I'm sure there's multiple reasons that Putin would invade Ukraine. I'm sure there's more reasons than we could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
But one that stuck out to me was the scarcity mentality. Because I was like, they have something that he wants at a base level, whether it's resources, whether it's land, whether it's the ocean, whether it's whatever. I mean, I guess it wouldn't be the ocean, but whatever it is.
You never know.
You never know. He might think it's connected to the ocean. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so my mind was just like, okay, so did I somehow sort of contribute to the war in Ukraine being started because I had this scarcity mentality? And I guarantee you that Putin had this, maybe still has this same underlying scarcity belief, even though he's in control of one of the top 3 countries in the entire world. And like that, like kind of triggered a little small dark night of the soul for me where I was like, holy shit. I was like, it really brought that whole oneness connection. It was like, okay, if I can just heal this, then maybe there's a chance that it'll help like mitigate the war in Ukraine.
Beautiful. No, I love it. Here's the beautiful thing. I love that you shared that is in my corporation, Masters of Self University. I'm going to go here first. Masters of Self, because we're here to master ourselves, because you can't help other people if you haven't yet mastered yourself. Right. So our coaching programs do precisely that. I love what you shared, that you had a bowl of eggs, only half full. And what did it trigger inside of you? It activated the anxiety. You became aware of the anxiety that was activated. You go deeper to the root and you see this is an actual scarcity program. And we think of overeating, eating too much. We think of it as something, anything other than scarcity oftentimes. And the beautiful thing is, this is a scarcity program that I'm afraid I won't have enough. I should heal that. Right? That is exactly precisely what I'm talking about when I say anything within us that is less than divine. A scarcity program isn't our divine selves showing up. It's lack. Divinity isn't lacking in anything, right? So that's how we become aware of what part of my shadow self is activated, because we are nothing but energy. So that scarcity, if there is, prejudice in us, if there's hate, if there's judgment in us about anything, no matter what it is, that is also what we are putting out into the world. The more judgment, the more of those negative programs that we put out energetically into the world, we are creating the world that we live in. And then we fight against the very world that we have created. Instead of saying, how have I been creating what I don't want to see in this world? So we have to educate ourselves first. That's true awakening. That's self-awareness, which is a very deep, ancient, and yet also simultaneously modern, new way of mystical spiritual education, is awakening to that. I am powerful. People like to awaken to, yes, I'm a powerful divine being. And it's like, no, those aren't just words. If you can't yet see that you've contributed to that war, which was beautiful that you were able to do that. If you can't yet see you are contributing to the most horrific things, all the human and sex trafficking, but I don't, unawakened. That just shows how unawakened we are, because people truly authentically awakening would say, how could I and how am I in any aspect of me somehow perpetuating, supporting, and creating that which I don't want to be a part of our world? First way of oneness is the way of responsibility. How am I somehow responsible for this? And anybody functioning in low grades of consciousness, well, I'm not responsible for that. And that's where you're unawakened, spiritual or not. It's an unawakened person that thinks that way.
So how would you walk, because like you're saying, that visceral reaction to it.
Yeah.
I don't know what I assume that people hearing this, there's going to be at least a handful of people who have that reaction of like, I'm not contributing to slavery in the Middle East. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
How do you break that down? Like, how do you find a way to have this sense of such a radical responsibility that you're contributing to something that you've never physically touched or maybe even spoken to existence? Yeah,
beautiful. So the easy thing, I'm going to come from just very practical right now, very left brain, very practical. All of our coaching programs are set up to take you one step at a time. And I'll explain that. You first learn what is triggering me. And it's not, trigger means I'm angry about anything. It's what has been activated inside of myself energetically. Period, end. We increase a level of self-awareness in my everyday life. What is activated, what has been triggered and is now activating inside of me that is anything less than divine? Your beautiful example of this triggered anxiety. I noticed I had anxiety. Beautiful. Anybody that has anxiety doesn't have a fucking mental disorder. Let's do a little wake-up call here. All this crap about get out of here with the mental health crap. It is a facade. This is a real energetic program that is running inside of you. That is not your divine self. That isn't the truth of who and what you are. It is there to speak to you. It is there to communicate in order to help awaken you to why this thing that is so uncomfortable called anxiety is actually activated and triggered inside of you. You are disconnected from your divine self. That's not a criticism. It's just the truth. So this anxiety is activated and running when we move through our everyday and say, okay, so what programs am I running? Anxiety is an emotional program. So I got triggered by that. How do I know I'm triggered? You were pulled out of 100% peace. That's how you know something is activated and running. You're running a program, mental program, emotional program, behavioral program, or an inner child wound got activated. Those are the 4 quadrants of our shadow self. So how do I know something has been activated inside of myself? This is where we start. I've been pulled out of peace. Okay, now I practice awakening. What programs am I actually running? And you start to awaken. Oh my God, my mind is actually saying the craziest shit about that or her or him. Like I had a frustrating day with my kids. Like I wanted to drown my kids in the tub. And it's like, no, that sounds terrible. I would never want to drown my kid. Shut up. If you have children, you have actually envisioned, the thought has crossed your mind that you wanted to drown them in the tub that day. Being a parent is really hard. And we can bring that dark sense of humor because it isn't literal. That's where we're unawakened. The thought was there. Why was the thought there? Because the mind makes shit up when we are frustrated or overwhelmed. And instead of denying that part of us, we bring it to the light. That is the foundation of this work. To how am I contributing to that massive, horrific stuff out there? You have to start to awaken to all the energies that are flowing through you every single day, because there's no such thing as them not flowing through you. You're a divine, infinite being. You're a divine soul having a human experience. You're nothing but energy. That's where we start.
It sounds like a good place to start. But in that response, you mentioned that mental health, you said something to the effect that mental health disorders or mental disorders aren't a real thing. And I think that's probably a really big thing we should unpack.
Yeah.
A reoccurring question I've asked my guests is like, how do you know you're not crazy, right? When we're talking about like the spirit realm, I heard you're a channeler as well. So like, the whole, how do I know I'm not crazy? And this is the first time I'm hearing that someone who's pointing out that mental disorders aren't a real thing. So
they're real. They're real. Let me just clarify that. It is what you are experiencing. That is very real. Whatever emotion, whatever thoughts, whatever your quote unquote symptoms are, we could say, however it expresses itself is very, very, very real. So let me be clear. The way we package it and label it and identify it in the United States, at least, is a load of crap. That is what's not real. That is a load of crap. And why it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Well, if we learned to work from spiritual psychology, from the science of energetics, is everything that I work from and everything I teach and all of that. If you learn to work from a level of energy, you realize your symptoms, your depression, for example, which is of course very real thing to experience, and it's awful. But medications and different things literally don't heal the cause of the depression. We talk about depression, anxiety, PTSD. I've been treating these things. I became an expert, a specialist in mental, emotional, behavioral health before I left the healthcare system, Western medicine, and started my own corporation. They're very real. What you experience is real. What we don't do in the way that we treat it with pharmaceutical medicine and all of that that's out there, we don't get to the cause of it. What is the cause of the symptom? Depression is a symptom. It isn't a cause. We need to do the work energetically, get to the cause of it, and learn how to work with energy to alchemize what created this symptom, what created this discomfort, what created the panic attack, what created the anxiety, whatever it is for you, all of the things. Where is the root cause? It is an energetic thing you learn to go inside of, and you learn to alchemize that energy and simply transform it into something more elevated. That's it. Pharmaceutical companies wouldn't make a lot of money if everybody learned how to do that, which is why it's packaged the way that it's packaged. You have the power to transform it. It doesn't mean you have the skill or the know-how. That's why we teach what we teach at Masters of Self University. That's why I left Western medicine and created this corporation, because they literally told me, stop healing people, Rachel. Sick people make us money. I said, I can't be a part of that. Sorry. That made my soul turn black for a moment. And I quote that. I've said it, I've shared that a lot. I knew right then and there that this is not what I thought I was going into this to heal people. Obviously, most people do when they go into healthcare, right? I was okay. I'm here to learn what not to be. I'm here to learn what the system is so that I can create something brand new and people have a place to go when they're ready to leave that system. And that was part of my soul's journey.
I really want to keep diving into this this conversation of mental disease, but I think in order to carry on from here, I'd love to hear like a quick synopsis or background of like your credentials, your experience in the workplace. What did you go to school for? Where did you work? What got you here professionally?
Sure. So I started in, I guess technically, if I go way, way back, I started in, as a behavioral therapist. But when I went to get my master's degree, it took me several years, by the way, to decide where I was going to go in education, like to further my education. I really struggled with, going into medicine, becoming a physician. I couldn't for the life of me decide what I was going to do. And I was really stuck for a while. And something just said, get into the therapeutic realm. And so I did. I got my master's degree as an occupational therapist, and I specialized in several fields, actually. One of them that I ended up specializing in was mental, emotional, and behavioral health. And that's what I ran with. And when I was working in the field and in, major hospitals in the East Coast, that's when I learned the truth about what goes on behind the scenes. And it just, it was soul crushing for me. I couldn't for the life of me understand why everybody that was being treated, and I had a lot of patients that were veterans, for example, just to give one example. And I would just go home hysterically crying because of the way veterans were treated. I'm like, but like they can heal that. Like, it boggled my mind. And I was just trapped in a sick system, because in a sick system, we use medication and we use all these treatments and we keep you in the system, and then you pay us for the rest of your lives. And we don't actually teach you how to heal yourself. We're here. I'm creating all of these programs that were very proactive and preventative medicine. Let's heal, and then let's learn how we can prevent from ever becoming this again. And I was shot down every time. And I literally kept being told, Rachel, stop healing people. Sick people make us money. And okay.
Wow.
And that's where and then you evolve in divine timing and all the things to create what I've created. I now certify coaches from all over the world in the type of work and healing and coaching that we offer at Masters of Self University. And I've done that because I want as many people on this planet to realize and awaken for real that they are divine, that they have the power to heal. They just have to be willing and devoted. They have to be willing to learn how. They have to be devoted to it. They have to be willing to gain the skills, because we're not taught this stuff growing up, and that's why I do what I do, and I have my corporation.
Wow. I mean, that's so difficult to hear. That's so difficult to hear that, I've kind of always said it tongue in cheek, our medical system isn't in the business of healing. It's just in the business of treating symptoms. It's not in the business of curing. It just treats.
Yep.
And this is reminding me of something that Andrew Schultz talked about. He's a comedian, if you're not aware. Mm-hmm. And he had a whole thing where like he was going to release this special. The company wanted him to cut jokes. He said no, so he was going to release it on his own. And through that whole process, he talks about how he realized, that there's this perception that Hollywood has an agenda and there's people in control that are pulling the strings. Mm-hmm. Through that whole process, what he saw anecdotally is that it wasn't necessarily that there was like one person at the top who was saying this isn't allowed, that's allowed. He saw it more as people within the system who didn't want to lose their jobs. So if they greenlit this thing, then maybe they could lose their job because of it. They have families to feed. So it's like, he kind of saw it as like, this is a little bit more from a healed perspective, let's say. What I'm curious is that it feels like there's a parallel here whenever it comes to the healthcare industry, whenever it comes to treating people as opposed to curing people.
Yeah.
What, like, in regards to this analogy, do you feel like you've seen what that is, or like what's that little energetic thing that's preventing us from taking this next step into actually curing people?
Well, first of all, physicians, which, hey, excellent for emergency medicine, by the way. I mean, I applaud them there. They're not educated in it. Literally, that's not the education they receive. So it isn't this isn't like a um, physicians are terrible and bring them all down. They're not literally learning what medicine is. They're learning pharmaceutical science, and that is what they're taught from. It's that simple.
This is the end of part 1. And Rachel's on to something here with the idea of we're not teaching the doctors the right thing, but this is okay. Because in part 2, the awakening, a deeper understanding of human potential, we're going to dive into your truest potential. You're going to be able to feel it at a new, deeper level. We're going to talk about treating versus curing. We're going to talk about understanding energy and setting boundaries in relationships. That tends to be a big one in this next part, if you will. So this next part will be releasing on Thursday, August 24th, and I hope to see you guys there. I feel like I have something else to say, but I'm blanking right now. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys on Thursday.